Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show. Your viewing is very much appreciated. I hope you enjoyed it. So, on to this week's episode of the show, which I think you'll agree has had plenty of thought put into it. And as you can see from the title page, it's about possibly my favourite New Zealand distillery, Cardrona. And before we go on, a big thank you to Georgia from the distillery for kindly sending the samples for today's episode of the show. Now, I have done one episode of the show on Cardrona before, several years back in actual fact, although the distillery hasn't been in existence for very long, 7-8 years I think. They haven't released that many bottlings, so it's actually taken me quite a while to get this little selection together. So in actual fact, they range from 2021 through to tail end of last year, these particular releases. So not exactly sort of prolific at releasing their bottlings, but I think that from what I've tasted, and hopefully today is no exception, that they've been releasing some really interesting whiskey. The big story, I suppose, with regards to the distillery is that just before Christmas of last year, the distillery was purchased by Inverhouse Distillers. Now, obviously, you may or may not know Inverhouse Distillers, but Inverhouse Distillers own distilleries such as Balblair, Pulteney, Knockdhu. They're the most well-known ones, and to a lesser well-known Speyburn, which lovely whiskey. So basically, they're expanding their empire, shall we say? And I'm pretty certain the distillery will be in really good hands. Inverhouse, as far as I can see, generally tend to take a fairly hands-off approach to managing the distilleries that they own. They kind of let the distilleries essentially get on with what they're doing, and when you think about it, it seems it's a bit daft basically to buy a distillery because it's, you know, either popular or on the up and things like that, to sort of then suddenly come along and go, right, we're going to change it all. You know, it just makes no sense at all. You know, you bought the distillery because there's a reason for it, so you kind of let the distillery kind of get on and do its thing. So if you want to sort of catch up on the history of the distillery and all that kind of stuff, just check out the previous episode of the show that I did on it, which I must admit I forget which number episode it was, but anyway, it shouldn't be too difficult to find. So as there's not a huge amount to say about the distillery, I'm just going to sort of introduce the lineup. They're all cask strength bottlings, so one's butt is full. I always love to slip that one in. Oh, the innuendos are coming to this afternoon. Anyway, yeah, right, let's just take a look at today's. Right, okay, so as you may or may not know, the distillery have used these kind of flying metaphors for their releases, and the first bottling we'll be looking at is a single cask bottling. It's called the Growing Wings, and this was the whole thing about, you know, when the distillery started, that these were the early releases. So this is 5 years old. It's cask number 275, which is an ex-Old Forester Bourbon cask, bottled I believe in 2021 at the slight ABV of 66.5%. God, dear God, it's not even lunchtime and I'm starting on the hard stuff. Bottling number 2 is another bottling within the Growing Wings releases. Again, another single cask. This is cask number 301, and where the previous bottling was a Bourbon cask, this is an ex-Pinot Noir from the Mount Difficulty Distillery. This is again 5 years old, bottled at 67.4%. Struth. And again, I think this was bottled in 2021. Certainly, I tasted this sample back in December of that year. Bottling number 3 was actually the first bottling they did in a 70cl bottle, which was, prior to that, they were all half bottles? No, 50cl bottles. Something like that. So this was their Cardrona Day release. This was the 7th birthday release, so I believe that they did a release each each year. I don't know whether this was the first one that actually made its way over to the UK. It was a vatting of, again, 4 Pinot Noir casks, but these were all from a completely different estate called Felton Road in Ortego. Cask number 653, which was filled in April of 2018. The other 3 casks, 678, 671 and 685, were filled in May of 2018, and this was bottled in 2022. Then we're moving on to the next bottling, which is called the Falcon. So they seem to have dispensed with the growing wings and all that, because here we have almost practically the full fat bottling, if you like. So this is from their oldest stocks, a vatting of 3 casks, an ex-Bourbon, ex-Sherry and an ex-Pinot Noir cask. So we're around sort of 7 or 8 years old, and this time it's bottled at the slightly more approachable 52%. I forgot to mention that also the Cardrona Day bottling was 52% as well. And then the final bottling we'll be looking at was called the Full Flight Sherry Cask, single sherry cask bottling. This was 7 years old and 1 day. It's cask number 114, and it was an ex-Oloroso cask, which had then been finished in Pedro Ximenez. So we're not going to overdo the sherry on this one, are we? It was distilled in January 2016, bottled in January of 2023 at 62.7%. So lots of cask finishes, lots of alcohol, and going to be using the water. So let's crack on. Okay, so let's kick off with the Growing Wings 5-year-old ex-Bourbon. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Lovely nose. Fragrant, soft vanilla oak, estery white fruit. Oh, it's a definite nip from the alcohol. You can feel that sort of tingling the nasal passages, shall we say. Oh, it's just got a beautiful honeysuckle, aromatic, light, elegant, delicate, but it's got some depth to it, character. And this is what I loved about the distillery's character. It has a beautiful character, and although it's only 5 years old, there's no faintiness, there's no off notes. Yes, it's youthful. It's got that sort of youthful, fresh intensity, but it's not sort of fainty. It's got no off the still notes. I wouldn't say it's perfectly mature, because obviously it could sort of gain more maturity, but it's absolutely gorgeous, and it sets out what the distillery is all about, and it's a beautiful balance, not too much American oak. So let's see what the palate is. Whoa, that's got some alcohol. Once the alcohol kind of sort of dissipates a little bit, there's white fruit, there's barley, a little bit of creamy oak. There's a slight kind of botanical herbal note kind of just coming through, along with some citrus. Length is really good, although it's kind of like it's kind of the alcohol is kind of causing my mouth to sort of water uncontrollably, which to a certain extent is keeping the finish going. It's quite intriguing, it has to be said. Definitely is going to need a little drop of water. I mean, that's tighter than a wallaby's chuff, as they say. Yes, I know, wrong country, but you know, somewhere in the southern hemisphere, isn't it? Anyway, let's see what the nose gives us now. Put a little drop of water. It's not quite so aromatic. It's a little bit more reserved now. It's a little bit more honey, possibly a little bit more barley. It's not quite. I was expecting this to suddenly sort of not explode, but you know, just become sort of more aromatic and more juicy, and it hasn't really. It's kind of almost gone into its shell a bit, which is just really unusual. I mean, that's not to say that this still isn't a lovely nose. It really is, but I much prefer the nose without the addition of water, it has to be said. Let's see what the power's on. Softer, longer, obviously less intensity from the alcohol. It does taste a little younger. Touch of white pepper now on the aftertaste, quite intriguing. Again, the white fruit is there. It's very soft. It's very juicy. It's got a lovely length to it. Again, elegant. Wow. I mean, I don't remember this white peppery note, but it's definitely there. And this is the thing that I've found with whiskey. Certainly, when you taste them, you know, sometimes a number of years after the first time you've tasted them, sometimes your palate just picks up different things. It's very rare that you literally, your tasting notes are essentially exactly the same as when you first tasted it. But I think overall I really like that bottling. It shows what the distillery is doing. The distillery character is definitely evident, and you know, I quite enjoyed that. So yeah, nice stuff. Okay, so let's move on to the second Growing Wings bottling. This is the Pinot Noir cask. Let's see what notes gives us on this then, shall we? Elegant, aromatic, quite malty, almost kind of, as the French would say, sauvage note. Earthy, red berries, straw, dried red fruits, a little perfumed fruit note. I'm guessing it's quite, there's a little tightness there. I think adding a little drop of water is really going to bring out the sweetness and probably emphasise the Pinot Noir cask. There's a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of cream possibly, a little bit of white fruit. It is quite sort of Pinot cask orientated, but I think there's enough there to sort of be interesting, enough there to sort of balance that out. I love the sort of controlled, natural character of it. It's not sort of overtly straw-like and intense, but there is, like I said, there's a slight sauvage note, and it's all really quite complex, I think. Let's see what the pal's like. Oh, that's intense. That's grippy, that's quite tannic, and the alcohols are kind of emphasising the tannins. It's really masked. Lovely spiciness though on the finish, real tongue-tingling sort of spiciness. Obviously that's the alcohol emphasising those spices. Again, it's quite malty, it's quite dense, it's quite rich. There's the obvious Pinot Noir sort of spicy red fruits, a little bit of red currant, cherry. There's a little bit of white fruit just fleetingly comes through on the mid palate. I think you have to kind of know what you're looking for to sort of like, you know, suddenly go, bit of distillery character, then it's gone, because you've got the sort of Pinot Noir, a little bit of distillery character, and then in come the tannins and the alcohol. So it is kind of, it's got a nice progression, I will give you that, but the distillery character in the mid part is a little bit on the fleeting side. Needless to say, that needs a little drop of water, so I'm hoping that will kind of open up the nose and make it sort of more approachable. Yeah, it has. It's still a little bit on the tight side, it has to be said. Maybe I should have put a little bit more water. There's some, again, it's kind of hasn't really changed it per se, and it's still fairly sort of Pinot Noir dominated. The red fruits are very noticeable, but there's also the white fruits, the distillery character, a little bit of honey, touch of chocolate, some chocolatey spices as well. It's just a lovely nose. I really like that. It's enough. There's enough balance there. I'm getting enough distillery character sort of to sort of like, you know, tick that box if you like. Wonderfully juicy, still very aromatic. Let's see what the palate like now. Oh, that's juicy. That's beautiful. Again, there hasn't been a great deal of change aside, you know, it does kind of open up on the Pinot cask. You get the distillery character, the white fruits, that kind of thing coming through on the mid palate, touch of apricot. And then in comes the tannins and the chocolatey tannins on the finish. It's just lengthened it. The sort of like, it's kind of, it's basically kind of opened it up. So the characteristics, the progression is still pretty much exactly the same as it is neat, except it just takes a little bit longer to get through that progression. So the distillery character isn't quite so fleeting. It's longer, it's juicier. And I have to say, considering this is just a single Pinot Noir cask, possibly a refill cask, I don't know whether that was the case. It certainly doesn't kind of come across as a first fill, but I might be wrong in that, because the Pinot Noir cask is initially pretty much, I wouldn't say dominating, but very noticeable before the distillery character comes in, and then we get the tannin. So I love the progression of that. I think it's a lovely whiskey. So yeah, another great one. Okay, so moving on to the next Pinot Noir cask release. This is the Cardrona Day release 2022. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Now, it certainly smells a little bit more mature than the previous one, although the reality is it isn't. Strange, that one, but there you go. That's what whiskey does sometimes. Quite fragrant, quite delicate, a little bit more perfumed. I don't get so much of that sauvage-y, straw-like kind of character. It's big. It's a big nose. I mean, there's a lot of Pinot-y, winey fruit, but also there's a lot of white fruits. There's a lot of sort of peach, pear, apricot. Really juicy. I mean, maybe it's because it's not cask strength, maybe because it's 52%. It has, if this was cask strength, it may well be tighter than a Wallaby's Chuff. But it's just gorgeous. I mean, it really is. Again, the balance is just about there. You know, it is more heavily sort of weighted towards the Pinot Noir for obvious reasons. There's a little bit of almost kind of grapefruit, yeah, menthol. Those tannins have just got that lovely sort of dark chocolatey edge. That's gorgeous. I mean, that is a lovely nose. It's just clean as a whistle as well. Absolutely stunning. I mean, again, these bottlings are not cheap. You know, Southern Hemisphere whiskey just has a tendency to be very expensive, and these are pretty expensive, but you know what, if you can afford it, definitely worth it, I think. Let's do it, pass one. Very much like the previous bottling, very much like the nose. Again, opens up on the slightly more perfumed, slightly more aromatic Pinot-y character. Like I said, less of that sort of straw, less of the dried sort of red fruits and the sauvage notes. Again, lovely estery white fruits coming through on the mid palate, tannins on the finish, a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of spice, a little bit of menthol as well. Lovely, lovely length, it has to be said. Very, very impressive. Lovely whiskey, full stop. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Falcon. Let's see what nose gives us on this then, shall we? There is actually, it does smell like there's quite a bit of maturity there. Now, I suppose the point being is, again, it's kind of southern hemisphere, hot climate, you are going to get sort of a lot of oak interaction and the sort of semblance of age, shall we say. And this certainly has it. It doesn't have that sort of dusty, sawdusty, old Scottish style, mature kind of nose, but having tasted the other three, you can certainly feel that there is more maturity at play in this spirit. In actual fact, scrub that, there is a little bit of that sort of dusty American oak note, a little bit of menthol, raisins, sultana, touch of red currant, touch of berry. Beautifully complex, really very, very impressive. Again, I'm getting the American oak, I'm getting the sherry, I'm getting the Pinot Noir, and I'm getting a little bit of distillery character. So the blending of these three casks just seems to have worked really, really nicely. I mean, you know, when they say that they blend together sort of casks, I often wonder whether they actually blend the whole of those casks together, because this certainly has got a beautiful balance. If you just took three random casks and just chucked them into a blending vat, you know, you've got no idea what you're going to get. And certainly the American oak on the nose is possibly the most sort of noticeable. It has that slightly toffeed, creamy kind of character, and that's what's kind of giving it that sort of slightly dustiness, that sawdusty sort of mature note. And then there's the dates and the raisins and the sultana and the dried red fruits and the sort of perfumed red fruits. They're kind of coming through as sort of secondary kind of notes. And then you've got underneath all of that, I can just pick out the distillery character, the white fruits, the apple, the peach. I mean, that's just beautiful. It's a nose you have to sort of like work at. You can't just go, "Ooh, yeah," well, you can go, "Oh yeah, that's nice," but it's something, it's a nose you kind of have to explore. Let's see what the power's like. Oh, that finish is gorgeous. I mean, bear in mind, this is seven or 8 years old. I mean, and it's just a beautiful whiskey. I mean, it kicks off with more of the American oak, getting the Pinot. The sherry is kind of secondary, a little bit of spicy, raisinated fruits, a little bit of sultana. Some distillery character again coming through on the mid palate. Tannins on the finish, that sort of slight spiciness, that grippiness. But there's so much juicy fruit that it's kind of all so beautifully balanced, really long, and like I said, you know, I'd love to see where this is going to go. I think this has certainly got the ability to sort of age continuously. I would love to see this in, say, another sort of 5-6 years, just to see where it's at. I mean, there's a possibility it might mature a lot quicker, and so, you know, by the time it's got to about 12, 15, it may well be, you know, that is probably about the maximum you're going to get out of it. I mean, I imagine they've got casks set aside that they're going to age for a considerable period of time, and I suppose we'll see what happens, you know, once Inverhouse have kind of done their inventory and sort of decided where they're going to go with it. So, but, you know, that, very impressive. Right, okay, so on to the final whiskey of the afternoon, and no, it's not actually quite afternoon yet, but anyway, we'll just say it's afternoon, shall we? Anyway, let's just see what those goes on this end. Sherry Monster. So kind of wasn't I mean, the thing is, I wasn't expecting, well, I sort of half expected to get some distillery character through from this, but it's big, it's chunky, it's chocolatey, lots of Oloroso dried fruit, a little bit of citrus peel. I don't get the distillery character. It is all about the sherry, and it's kind of, to a certain extent, a little bit disappointing because of the previous bottlings have just had this beautiful balance. Well, alright, yeah, you could argue that maybe the balance is skewed slightly more towards the cask, but at least there was some balance, and I'm afraid here we're not getting that. We're getting all, you know, Oloroso with a little bit of treacle, a little bit of, you know, lots of raisinated fruits. It's just, it's not my favourite bottling, and it's, you know, I suppose not a surprise, I guess. Anyway, let's see what the pass on. So this one, the palate has kind of gone over to the dark side, it has to be said. So it's raisinated fruits, dried fruits, it's Oloroso, a little bit of treacle. There's no distillery character, I can't get anything at all. You know, and I know what I'm kind of looking for, and I don't get it. You know, it's actually quite spicy again, chocolatey, quite tannic on the finish. But there's that kind of herbal tannic Oloroso-y character. It's not got the soft chocolatey tannins that the Pinot Noir casks have imparted on the spirit. It's a slightly more harder tannin, which is quite intriguing really, because, you know, I would have expected, well, I don't know, at the end of the day, the thing is with obviously casks that are, you know, wine casks, they're probably, I don't know, they're possibly ex-French oak, I don't know, that's the whole point. This kind of comes across more kind of spicier, but drier tannins. It doesn't have the sort of sweetness of tannins, it doesn't have the chocolatiness of the tannins, and that's maybe the sort of, like, you know, the chocolatiness is probably the integration of the tannins with the Pinot, and that's a whole different sort of aspect of whiskey, isn't it? You know, the oak, what the oak is adding, but in this instance the oak is adding far too much essentially, and I'm getting no distillery character. I'll put a little drop of water with it. I mean, there's a possibility that the sherry cask may well just completely sort of disappear now. I'd be surprised given what we've tasted so far. Leafy, lots of leafy herbal sherry now. You know, okay, maybe there's a touch of kind of barley. I kind of looking for it, if you know what I mean. So it may or may not be there. You know, essentially it's still pretty much a sherry monster, is what I'm trying to say. Let's see what the pass like. Softer, juicier, still quite spicy, still very heavily sherried, not a great deal of distillery character. Maybe it would have been lovely to have the sort of full flight Bourbon cask, but unfortunately I didn't have that. My least favoured of all of these bottlings, it has to be said, and it just, where all the others exhibited a lovely balance, this is just wholly gone over to the dark side, Obi, as they say. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Georgia from the distillery for sherry cask return. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to Georgia from Cardrona for samples for today's episode of the show. Very much appreciated. Yeah, intriguing. It's going to be interesting to see where things go. Like I said, I don't think Inverhouse are going to sort of, like, you know, step in and decide they're going to sort of change everything. I think they're going to let the distillery kind of get on with it and do its own kind of thing. And personally, you know, with the exception of the final bottling, I love what they're doing. The Growing Wings ex-Bourbon certainly showed lots of the distillery character. You've got the estery fruit. It was kind of maybe a bit young, a bit sort of awkward. Certainly when you put water with it, it kind of did exactly the opposite of what I was expecting. I would expect it to sort of open up and be more aromatic, but in actual fact it just kind of closed in on itself, and it's just kind of really strange. I don't think it's not very often have I experienced that. Normally, like I said, you put a little drop of water, it tends to open the whiskey out rather than do the opposite. But in saying that, kind of displays what the distillery is about. Lots of distillery character, really, really nice. The Growing Wings Pinot. So this was kind of quite interesting because it had that sort of almost kind of raw, sort of straw-like Pinot Noir kind of character, that sort of wininess kind of going on. Like the sort of like the progression, and that kind of progression kind of to a certain extent followed through into the Cardrona Day release. You know, it was very much Pinot Noir to start off with, distillery character coming through on the mid palate, chocolatey tannins on the finish. Really enjoyed that. Lovely progression, great whiskey, and like I said, you know, just the balance was just about there. You know, it was kind of, you know, it's a sort of thing I bang on and on and on about, but at the end of the day, I want, you know, I want to know what the distillery is all about, and I suppose it kind of helps when you taste a distillery whiskey, any distillery's whiskey, you know, aged in maybe refill American oak. You get the distillery character, and then you can hopefully pick it up on some of the other bottlings that they do. I thought the Falcon was, again, a lovely whiskey, really nice blending of the three kind of casks. Did seem to be more heavier on the American oak, with the sort of like the Pinot Noir and certainly the sherry playing second fiddle, which my kind of whiskey, it has to be said. Again, really lovely balance, lovely progression, lovely softness to it. And the final whiskey, the Full Flight Sherry Cask, my least favoured. But in the end of the day, you can't argue with the quality of what the whiskey that this distillery is producing. Not my favoured bottling, it has to be said. Far too much sherry character, no distillery character. Not really that interesting when you've got all these other ones that are very, very interesting. So, so yeah. Great whiskies, not cheap, as they say. That, you know, they are, unfortunately, like as I said, most Southern Hemisphere whiskies, you know, they do tend to be sort of pretty expensive. But if you're going to treat yourself, then I don't think you're going to sort of like be disappointed, unless well, you know, it depends. Like I said, you know, if you have the sort of similar kind of palate to me, the similar kind of taste, then you're going to love everything apart from the final bottling. But if you love the sherry monsters, well, there you go. Anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I'm not entirely sure what's happening next week. I've got to cover staff holiday next weekend, so there may or may not be an episode of the show. Depends whether I can sort of get a day off during the week to do the chores, as they say. But anyway, if not, until next time, good afternoon and good ramming.